Good morning and welcome to BN Daybreak. I'm Kerry Lanaghan. We start locally with Professor Theo Venter on John Steenhuisen's exit and what comes next in the DA leadership race. He spoke to BN journalist Chris Steyn last week.
It became clear that it is the combination of three or so issues that kind of flowed together that forced his hand. The one being the accusations made by Dion George. Whatever it is, it's still fairly confidential. Nobody really knows what it is that he shared with the DA, but it's being investigated. And the second thing, of course, is I would say two approaches in the DA. The one saying that the participation in the GNU is fine, but we must be more aggressive. The other approach said, no, let's ease our way in and see where we can get. Those two things, and I think John is more towards let's ease ourselves in. Helen Zille, I think, is more towards, guys, we must strengthen our backs and we must be a little bit more aggressive. That started playing out in the party, and I think lastly, the foot and mouth disease and the reaction of the farming community, very, very aggressive reaction all over the place. And it seems to me that, if I can call it that, I think his reading of the room temperature was wrong. And the problem was much bigger. But here I must give John Steenhuisen a little reprieve. He inherited Onderstepoort. He inherited a department that under Toko Dudiza was already not doing what they had to do. And for him to turn that around in 1.5 years is just not enough. But I think eventually he paid the price. The fact that he stays on as party leader until April, but that he will now focus more on the departmental work, I think that's good for agriculture. I know there's a few voices in agriculture like SAI and like Sake Liga and things and groups like that, Transvaal Agricultural Union and Free State Agri. They're not happy with that. But if you look at the numbers and you look at Agri SA, they're happy. They haven't said a word in this whole debate. But it is these small guys that was all over the place. I think there is a large majority that feels, leave John Steenhuisen where he is. At least now he can focus on an epidemic in agriculture that is comparable to COVID in South Africa in 2020, 2021.
So which names have come across your desk as the next leader?
Well, I think Gordon Lewis, Hill Lewis, is a front runner because his name was already mentioned earlier. I've seen the name of Alan Winde as Premier of the Western Cape. I'm not so sure that he has the gravitas, the energy for what the DA demands. I've seen the name of Solly Malatsi, our Minister of Communication. I've seen the name of Solly Mashlangu from Gauteng. Siwiwe Garube's name was mentioned.
Next to the US and UK, where the Epstein files continue to drive political and legal fallout. Our partners at Bloomberg report.
Today, members of Congress were allowed to review unredacted files on Jeffrey Epstein. Some key lawmakers are now pushing for more information on the sex trafficking probe of Epstein, and they're raising the prospect of new criminal prosecutions. Republican Thomas Massie and Democrat Ro Khanna said they believe there are 6 men whose names have not been revealed who could face criminal charges. Massie said he is willing to give the DOJ more time to make their names public.
I mean, what we're after is the men who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked women to. We want those names published. We're not out to embarrass people. And the problem is we went in there hoping to see that in 302 forms. What we found out is those 302 forms were redacted before they got to the DOJ.
That is Kentucky Republican Congressman Thomas Massie. Earlier in the day, Ghislaine Maxwell, the convicted accomplice of Epstein, refused to answer any questions from a House panel investigating his activities. She asserted her Fifth Amendment rights. Now, the fallout from the release of the Epstein files is spreading overseas. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing a call to resign. Starmer had been advised to appoint Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the U.S. Later, it was revealed Mandelson had ties to Epstein. Over the weekend, Starmer's chief of staff, Morgan McSweeney, quit, saying he took full responsibility for recommending Mandelson. But today, several of Starmer's cabinet members voiced support for their prime minister.
From politics to markets, Alphabet's rare 100-year bond plan and what it says about the AI investment race. Here's Bloomberg's Peter Ahlstrom to provide more context.
Alphabet even thinking about a 100-year bond sale? What's this about?
Well, it was just last week that we got these staggering capital spending plans from the big tech giants. First, it was Alphabet saying it could spend as much as $185 billion this year on this AI build-out that they are planning. Then Amazon the next day said that it could spend $200 billion on CapEx. So these are really staggering numbers. This is the most amount of money that any company has ever spent in terms of CapEx on something like this. But one of the big questions at the time was whether investors were going to be willing to give them the money to be able to make these investments. Both companies, of course, have a lot of cash, but they don't want to spend all that money out of their cash. So they went to the markets, and we got the answer today in Alphabet's case, and it was a resounding yes. Investors really want to invest. They went out expecting to raise $15 billion in USD. They got so much demand that they bumped that up to $20 billion. They're also going to issue their first instruments in British pounds and in Swiss francs also. So we're seeing the one that you were referring to in the 100-year bond is going to be in the UK. They're offering that 100-year bonds. You don't really see these really very often at all. It's usually by governments or sometimes universities. The University of Oxford has issued them in the past, but it's very rare to see those coming from companies. The last time we saw something like this, Motorola actually issued 100-year bonds in 1997. Believe it or not, I was covering Motorola in 1997, and you could not expect the future for that company that we've seen since then.
Yeah, it's had quite a fall from grace, so to speak. But can you help us reconcile as well when it comes to these hyperscalers or these big tech companies and how they're tapping the debt markets? How are they still able to do so and get pretty solid investor demand at a time where Max Evans, you take a look, it's down from the October highs, and then there are still these concerns about circular deals, circular financing?
Yeah, there's still some questions about whether these big AI investments are going to pay off. And we went through that last year. Certainly you saw a bunch of these companies take a hit because of how aggressive their spending plans are. I think what you're seeing from at least these big 4 or 5 companies is that they're going to step up spending because they see this as a competition to lead in the AI race. Nobody wants to be left behind. We've seen this many times before in things like search and mobile operating systems and web browsers where one company tends to win. They tend to take the vast majority of the profits from that business. And you see Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, all of them are competing very aggressively. So they're going to make these investments now. They have the cash. They're able to go, as we saw today, they're able to go to the markets and raise this money through bonds also. They want to make these capital investments now in order to be able to win the race or at least compete very aggressively to try to win the AI race for these AI customers in the future.
Staying with tech. AI was a major force in Super Bowl advertising, and the engagement numbers are turning heads. Kevin Krim, president and CEO of EDO, sat down with Caroline Hyde and Ed Ludlow on Bloomberg Tech.
What's more bird's eye perspective is that tech dominated just the ad spend, the ad that were out there.
It was the tech Super Bowl, Caroline. It was absolutely groundbreaking to see more AI product ads than there were combined automotive and beer ads, the stalwarts of your typical Super Bowl.
AI.com gains traction. Why? Because no one understands what it actually is. I mean, we now all peel back the onion and understand it's the guy who made his money in crypto.com has bought this very expensive website and now wanting us to all put our details into it and have an AI agent of the future. But what was the recipe for getting us to convert?
Well, there's this heated rivalry going on between Anthropic and OpenAI, and then suddenly this dark horse, AI.com, that no one had heard of, comes in and is trolling both of them, along with Mark Zuckerberg, mentioning all these folks by name. And what you've got is that perfect formula of introducing something totally new to people, but it's completely on trend. This was the AI Super Bowl. And so it surprised people. It caught people's eye, and they crashed the website. It was down for many minutes after that ad aired, and finally came back online. But what I think you saw just writ large was two things going on in the Super Bowl. And we at EDO, we're measuring the outcomes generated by these ads. And you saw people either engaging with new technology that could change their lives, whether it was AI or healthcare. There was a lot of pharma and diagnostic tests being promoted that all did well. And or you saw people going back to the tried and true nostalgia, heartwarming, celebrity-driven pieces. Those were the things that worked.
What's so interesting about the technology piece of this is what was being advertised, right? So there's a lot on social media about the who's who of tech being in attendance at the Super Bowl or talking up their own ads. There were also some fake ads. But my main point, Kevin, these are like enterprise-facing things, B2B. When you measure the engagement or outcomes, like how can we gauge if these were successful pieces of business at the enterprise level that those companies put in place?
Yeah, so what we're measuring at EDO is we're looking at how many people searched for the brand, went to the brand's website, used the brand's app in the minutes following these ads on TV, and it's highly predictive of, very correlated with changes in market share, changes in sales. Enterprise, it's an interesting way to market. You've got to find needles in haystacks, but this is by far the world's biggest haystack. It's the most engaged audience you can find. You couldn't replicate this kind of audience through targeted digital advertising over a month or many months, even if you spent tens of millions of dollars like it costs to advertise in the Super Bowl. So for those folks with an enterprise message, it's still one of the best ways, most cost-efficient ways, ironically, to reach those kinds of high-end audiences. And the game being, as you mentioned, in the Bay Area, in the home of tech, that much better.
And we close with crypto. As Bitcoin swings sharply again and traders look for stability around the $70,000 level.
Often on the weekend, there's thinner liquidity, so we see bigger moves. And it seemed to be to the upside.
It could be to the upside, but to the downside as well. But now we saw Bitcoin kind of steadying, which is great because it's now hovering around 69,000, which is a big sigh of relief. Last week, it dipped below as much as $60,000. And that 16% decline was a lot because there's a gauge of implied volatility index. It jumped to 97%, which is the highest since the Sam Bankman-Fried FTX days in 2022. But beyond the price movement, I think it's really just about a reckoning. What is Bitcoin? Is it a hedge against inflation, a hedge against centralized government, a hedge against the dollar? And I feel like a lot of people are feeling confused.
Isabel, what's the flows data, the most recent flows data telling us?
We are seeing some inflows, at least with U.S. Bitcoin ETFs. They recorded an inflow of 221 million on February 6th. So you could think of that as maybe optimism again or maybe just dip buying. But then still, it's really kind of, at least to the people I talk to, they're like, what is this? It's a structural change. It's a philosophical change. I want to dip more into the structural because we know that Bitcoin is kind of being institutionalized. And this may in itself be the problem because on October 10, fondly known as 10/10, that's when we saw billions of dollars liquidated because of leverage and derivative trades. And last week, we also saw the same, $2.5 billion in forced liquidations, according to CoinGlass. So maybe Bitcoin is also kind of possibly becoming a victim of its own success.
That's it for today's Biz News Daybreak. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.